Okay, so we're picking up in Deuteronomy. Quick recap: Deuteronomy is right before Moses is about to die. He's got, maybe a couple weeks left in his life. He's talking to the children of Israel, giving them final instructions about how they are to govern themselves according to law, God's law, rules, and decrees for them as a nation. And it's very specific. Covers family law, marriage, divorce, covers criminal law, covers property, covers inheritance, covers the way to worship. Just very, very, very specific for how this nation is going to function. And so the generation he's talking to were, kids or born in the wilderness. And so now they're the adults. Their parents failed to enter the land about 38 years ago. And so they all died off in the wilderness. And so now he's having this retelling. So Deuteronomy literally means second law, not as in it's a new law, but it's a second telling of the law. So we're about halfway through the letter, and we're picking up in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 1. Click on that so it can be evident. All right, so thou shalt not sacrifice unto the Lord thy God any bullock or sheep wherein is blemished or evil favoredness, for that is an abomination unto the Lord. All right, so there's multiple reasons for this. Let's just go with the most practical. When they were making a sacrifice to the Lord, it was supposed to be just that. It's supposed to be a sacrifice, not these are my sloppy seconds. This is my third, three-legged sheep that I'm not really going to get any use out of anyway. It's not helpful to me. And so as a recycling, as efficiency offering, let me just get rid of it and I'll use that as a sacrifice. So one, that was cheap. Two, but it was also disrespectful. Later, I think it's in Nehemiah's day, he is upbraiding the Israelites for the sacrifice they're bringing to the Lord. And he uses the equivalent. He says, if you had brought this animal and offered it unto your governor, he would have been offended. And yet you're going to offer it unto the Lord. And so, just from a very practical standpoint of taking the ugly, three-legged, animals without eyes and just the ones that aren't good and best and proper, we're not going to be pleasing to the Lord. Abomination is something that's disgusting, right? So you're not pleasing him with that. In the bigger sense, this is also a type that points all the way forward to Jesus. In Hebrews, it talks about Jesus being, the Christ being the offering that was without blemish. And so that is this in a small scale is pointing to the perfect scale of Jesus had no spot or blemish in relation to sin. And so it's a little picture, a couple thousand years or 1,500 years before Jesus comes on the scene. But this is what it's ultimately pointing to. There's going to be a sacrifice, but it can't be spot or blemish. And the idea of spots and blemish are often associated with sin. And you can see that in Ephesians letter when it talks about Jesus dying for his church, for his bride, that he was cleansing it, making it so it would not have spot or blemish, which is what we all were to begin with. So very narrow sense, got to offer best good, don't take a cheap way out. It's disrespectful. But in the bigger sense is that this is a type that is going to be fulfilled by Jesus, where he offers himself as the perfect sacrifice. All right, so verse 2. If there be found among you within any of thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, just side note, the expression in any of thy gates is referring to within any of your cities, right? A city wasn't a city unless it had walls and a gate, right? You didn't have the ability to protect yourself unless you could keep out the invaders. So they had towns and they had villages, which were like lower tier, but they didn't have necessarily protection. And so those places, if you saw invaders coming, you would flee to a city and you'd be behind the gate. So that's who you're talking about. Within any of the cities which the Lord thy God giveth thee, which is a pretty important statement, because you're about to go into a nation that didn't belong to you. God's given it to you. He's going to give you the victory. And so those cities that you're going to be dwelling in, they are God-given gifts. All right. If there be in those cities man or woman, doesn't matter, that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of the Lord thy God in transgressing his covenant, and hath gone and served other gods and worshipped them, either the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven. So doesn't matter if it's a male or female, anybody in that city who is transgressing God's covenant, which, first couple commandments are involving worshiping the Lord God alone, not having graven images. If they've disobeyed that and they're serving other gods, doesn't matter what category of the gods. They could be worshiping the sun, they can be worshiping the moon, they can be worshiping the host of heaven, which is the stars. He said, I've commanded you not to do all those things. And if it be told thee, and thou hast heard of it, and inquired diligently, and behold, it be true, and the thing certain that such abomination is wrought in Israel. So we'll just pause there. So the instructions are to the people. If you hear in one of the cities that this is going on, you have to inquire diligently. Can't put your head in the sand, say, oh, I don't know what's going on. Not my problem, not my monkeys, not my circus. You have to inquire diligently and see if this thing is true. It's not just rumor. We're not talking Salem witch trials, just but if it's actually true, and the thing is certain. So this is pretty, in legal terms, high bar, standard of proof here. We're not talking about, again, just, well, I'm pretty sure so-and-so worships the moon, and there's no other corroborating witnesses. That's not sufficient. But if it's true and it's certain, then you have to do something. Right? So verse 5 is what you have to do. Then you shall bring forth that man or that woman which have committed that wickedness unto the gates. And the gates are, again, often associated with being a place of judgment. It's a gathering place coming in and out of the cities. That's where elders and leaders would often sit and they render judgment. And so it is a public spot. You're bringing them outside the city, and that is where you would have an execution. That man or that woman shall stone them with stones till they die. Right? This is not a pea gravel type stones. This is stones to cause death, and you continue until they are die. Why? Because they've disobeyed God's command. He's chosen this people, said, you're going to be my people, I'm going to be your God, these are going to be the laws, and you will worship me and me alone. And this person has violated that, so it's a capital crime. Again, talked about that standard of proof, that be certain at the mouth of 2 or 3, right? Preferably 3, but if you got at least 2 witnesses, he that is worthy of death shall be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness, he shall not be put to death. So you've got to have at least 2 people verifying the truth of the statement that they are actually worshiping other gods. It can't just be one person who's got a grudge, but you got to have 2 or 3 to verify it. Now, the witnesses can't just make that claim and then fade in the background. They actually have to come and put their hands involved in the death. It says the hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death. So they've got to pick up the stone, the one that they're saying has done this, and they have to be willing to chunk it. Now, if they're lying, then they've got the blood of an innocent upon their hands, and the Lord will deal with that in another way. But assuming they're telling the truth, this is not I'm just going to say this and then I'm not involved anymore, but you're the first one to put him to death. And afterward, the hands of all the people, so shalt thou put the evil away from thee. You see this concept show up with Jesus and the woman that was taken with adultery. And one thing, what happened to the guy? Under the standard of law, both the woman and the man are subject to be put to death. But he asks those around them, he says, okay, you who were without sin, let him cast the first stone. So in theory, these people caught her in the very act, and they're witnesses. And so they should be willing to, verify that by participating in stoning. But Jesus put that additional, question to them. Okay, if you don't have any sin, then you go ahead and cast the first stone. And so that was when they, being convicted of their own conscience, they left, starting at the oldest and coming down to the youngest. All right, so that's 2 through 7. How do you handle when you've discovered that there is an individual committing idolatry within one of your cities? And this is a very serious thing. This was not, live and let live. This is God's nation. This was his people. This is how it's going to happen. And so under the law, this was the offense. That was a capital crime. All right, so going back to the idea of in the gates, you had these judgments, and there would be judges in each city. They would make determinations. Sometimes matters are hard, and they wouldn't be sure. If there arise a matter that's too hard for thee, between blood and blood, so you've got maybe you've got two people dead or injured or of the same family, and you're not really sure what to do. And between plea and plea, he's saying, she's saying, whatever, and between stroke and stroke, which is generally injuries. So whether it's death and arguments and mutual injuries, and you're not really sure who's the aggressor, right? That kind of really complicated car accident where the police is like, now whose fault was it? And you get 17 different answers. If the matter is too hard of a controversy within your gate, within your city, then he gives, kind of like the appeal system, he gives you another layer to go to. You shall arise, get up, get thee unto the place where the Lord thy God shall choose. Now that's shorthand for where the tabernacle will be. He has not yet chosen Jerusalem to be the spot to build the temple. That's like 500 years down the road. So the tabernacle, when they eventually go into the land, is going to first be at Shiloh, and then that's going to be removed, and David will bring the ark outside. Well, not to the temple because it hasn't been built, and it'll be built by Solomon, but it'll be there at Jerusalem where God said for it to be. And then it'll be Jerusalem for the rest of Israel's history. So that would be where you were to go. So, but the Lord got to choose that, but he hadn't chosen it yet. So it's a future event. You can leave your city, wherever you're at. You go then, whether it's to Shiloh and then later Jerusalem, and you're going to go to the next authority to hear the matter. Then shall come unto the priests of the Levites and unto the judge that shall be in those days and inquire. So the judge in those days. After Deuteronomy is the book of Joshua. Joshua in Greek is pronounced Jesus, but Joshua is going to lead the people in. He is going to have the military campaigns and conquer most of Canaan, and then he's going to die. And then there's going to be this period where they're departing from the Lord, and then the Lord would punish them by sending in adversaries, and then at some point he would raise up a judge to deliver them. Well, that judge is who's being referenced here. That whoever that top authority is in the nation, you go to the Levites and under the judge, and they can handle this harder matters. Similar to when Moses was alive, he had judges throughout the tribes, and they would hear the simple matters, and when they couldn't figure it out, then they brought it unto him as the higher to make that decision. So you go to the place where the tabernacle's at, you ask the priests, the Levites, the judge in those days, and inquire, and they shall show thee the sentence of judgment. All right? They're going to have the final say. Now, what if you don't like it? What if they didn't rule in your favor? The response is, thou shalt do according to the sentence, which they of that place which the Lord shall choose, in Shiloh, Jerusalem, shall show thee. And thou shalt observe to do to all that they inform thee. So you don't get to argue with them, right? They've rendered the judgment. You've got to do it. You've got to observe it. Not just part of it, all of it. According to the sentence of the law, which they shall teach thee, and according to the judgments which they shall tell thee, thou shalt do. Now, their job is to apply the law to the situation. It's not just to make up stuff, but that which God has laid out, they've got to apply it to this difficult case. And so you as a pleader here, you shall not decline from the sentence that they shall show thee to the right hand or to the left. Right? There's no, I understand what you're saying, but I'm going to go over here instead. Not this way, not that way. Because if you are, then you are presuming to know better. And so that's the doing presumptuously. The man that will do presumptuously and will not hearken unto the priest that standeth to minister there before the Lord thy God or unto the judge, even that man shall die. And thou shalt put away the evil from Israel. So the disobedience and rejecting of the sentence given by either the priest, or if there's a time, there's a judge, because there's periods where there wasn't that judge, that's a capital offense. Now, it could just be a property dispute, and you're arguing over boundaries or cows or whatever, not a capital offense in and of itself, but by you rejecting the authority of that decision maker, we're saying that that person, by rejecting it, is forfeiting his life to put away the evil from Israel. And there's a deterrent effect. Verse 13. And all the people shall hear and fear and do no more presumptuously. You better believe that the next guy on the judge's docket, if he saw the first one who says, no, I'm not going to abide by that, if he is executed, you think he's going to argue? Yes, judge. No, judge. Whatever you say, judge, right? So that dealing presumptuously, so there's a real deterrent effect. All right. Finally, last kind of section is anticipating. God's God. He knows what they're going to do. Even though they don't need a king, he knows that they're eventually going to ask a king. And so he is setting out the rules that are going to govern that king. When they ask for it, this is in Samuel's day, it'll be about 450 years later, Samuel is going to be very upset with it. And God tells Samuel, buddy, don't worry about it. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me, because God was already their king. But they wanted someone they could see to lead them and go out before them for war, like all the other nations. Mom, all the other kids are doing it. And so he is going to set up some rules for what that king has to do. So, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shall dwell therein. So this is post-conquering. And shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Now notice, he's saying, you're going to do this. He's not telling them to do this. He's just acknowledging what they are going to do. We want to look like the nations that are about us. Here's what you will have to do. What are the boundaries? Thou shalt set in any wise him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. So when you get to the point where you say, we need a king, God gets to pick him. One from among your brethren, all right? Can't be a stranger, can't be a foreigner, must be an Israelite. Shall set thou king over him. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. Right? So you've got a complete prohibition there. And then once God's chosen him, he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. All right. Multiplying horses. That may sound strange to us. Cavalry, all right? Military might, having the ability to fight battles, right? Kings want to have strong armies. And so, but this king is a king of God's people, right? And he is servant of God. And so the idea that he's trying to amass this carnal forces to himself, he's like, no, that's not the way. Apparently there's a large supply of horses in Egypt. They have a large number of chariots. And so it would be very tempting to make some kind of treaty, to make some exchange, to send people down to Egypt in order to amass more horses. And God's saying, no, that is off limits. You don't go back. I brought you out of there. Not even if you think it's going to make you stronger. This is very plain. You remember what Solomon built? He had some really large stables for horses. He kind of ignored this one. He also ignored the next one. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. That's exactly what happened with Solomon, is that I think he had 700 wives, another 300 concubines, and they were of all different flavors of background and religion, and he started building them personal idols and temples and things for their gods. And so he got himself into trouble by amassing large numbers of wives to himself. And then finally, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So what do people with power tend to amass as a kingship, right? You want military power, you want physical wealth, and you want natural pleasure for yourself. And God is saying, for this king, those three are really not, that should not be their focus, should be their emphasis. And it shall be, when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write a copy of this law in a book, out of the which that is before the priests and Levites. So the priests have a copy of the law. You, king, you need to write a personal copy. Now, this is not Control-C, copy, hit the printer. This is, you got to write that joker by hand. And so that's a lot of work. But once you've done it, then you got to hang on to it. So verse 19, it shall be with him, and he shall read it therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. And so I don't know if any king ever actually wrote out a copy. We don't have it recorded, but the logic makes perfect sense that if you've written out a copy, you've at least read it once, and then the instructions, you're supposed to be reading it regularly, because ultimately the king is like what that judge used to be as the highest authority. His job is when people come with these hard matters, he's supposed to be able to apply the law. Well, if you don't know the law, you're not going to be able to do it right. And I think it was in Josiah's day that they were cleaning out the temple and they found a copy of the law. It had been lost. And so they had no idea what they were supposed to be doing as far as governing the kingdom, or, really specifically in how to worship the Lord. And so, even David, when he went to bring the ark up, if he had written out his copy and he'd studied it well, he would have known that ark had to be toted by hand by the priest. Instead, they had put it on, an ox cart, and the poor kid driving it, put his hand up to steady it, and the Lord struck him dead for, touching that which he should not have touched. He didn't have the authority. The king set him up for failure there. He should have known better by not being diligent in his reading. So again, this was not granting permission to have a king, but knowing that once they're going down that road, he was going to set up the instructions. And so, the first king, Saul, God chose him. He anointed him Samuel. And then when he, disobeyed God multiple times and God rejected him, God used Samuel to anoint David. And then it was David's line and descendants, which ultimately are going to get you down to Jesus. That's the real king, the one who sat on David's throne for forever. So, Deuteronomy chapter 17.